What happens is I see people who've done a lot of the right things. They come to me and they've gotten all kinds of advice from the blogosphere. The people who are blogging don't put out enough information so that one can interpret the degree to which their case is similar to another person's case.
Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode number 48 of the Healthy Skin Show. Today, we are going to talk about a topic that has not been covered yet on the Healthy Skin Show, specifically dealing with the connection between candida and seborrheic dermatitis, also known as dandruff. I've got a great guest with me today who's going to talk all about this, break it down, and probably give you a ton of ahas as to why, when we use these shampoos and different creams to help get rid of the quote unquote malacia that we oftentimes focus a lot of energy on, we're forgetting that something underneath the surface is going on, and we're going to dive into what that is and why it happens. Because the conversation today went a little bit on the long side, we're going to go straight into the interview because I couldn't cut anything out. It was too good. So let's dive in. Today, I have with me a very special guest who's actually returning for his second interview. And we're going to be talking about something that we have not touched on yet here at the Healthy Skin Show. You may remember Dr. Alan Dattner. He is a board-certified dermatologist practicing holistic and integrative dermatology for nearly 40 years, helping patients who have failed conventional care. He uses nutrition, herbal medicine, supplements, functional medicine, applied kinesiology, psychosomatics, and more to heal the underlying causes of skin disorders. He has a background in immunology, having worked in 6 different immunology laboratories with renowned scientists, culminating in studies of cross-reactive immune recognition as a visiting scientist at the National Institutes of Health. And that's pretty cool. The research led him to understand the scientific validity of digestive issues as a cause of inflammation in the skin. Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Dr. Dattner.
No, you're very welcome.
Today, let's talk about seborrheic dermatitis. This is the first time ever we have discussed this topic here on the Healthy Skin Show. Why don't we start out by having you just describe very briefly what exactly this condition is?
Well, seborrheic dermatitis is the condition that underlies the common condition we know as dandruff. But seborrheic dermatitis can be more extensive than just scaling in the scalp. As most people know, dandruff appears as scaling, white scale in the scalp that often shows up on a black dress or a black suit and can be a little bit disturbing, but the more advanced forms involve the eyebrows, involve redness around the sides of the nose, and also even can involve portions of the sternal section of the chest. So it can be more involved, and sometimes the scale can be very thick. And there's even a little bit of a crossover to almost to psoriasis in some patients, where we have what we call seborrheic with very thick scale and redness in the scalp.
Interesting.
So it involves inflammation of the skin that leads to a sequence of events that causes over-proliferation of the inflamed skin so that the scales start developing because the skin is dividing so fast. And then those appears is what we see as dandruff, and sometimes is the redness that we see in people with seborrhea and dandruff.
And I know too, a lot of times the solutions that are provided people, especially with dandruff, are like these special shampoos, which help in some people and in others they don't. Why do you think it is that people are struggling so much? I mean, this is an embarrassing, frustrating, annoying problem that, as you said, can show up on your dress, on your coat. If you are a performer or you're somebody out in public, that can be really embarrassing and make you feel uncomfortable in showing up. So why do you think it is that we're just not the current treatments just aren't hitting the nail on the head and helping people really see massive improvement.
Well, there are a couple issues involved. One of them is that I don't think anybody's ever died or been hospitalized for seborrheic dermatitis. So that's both the good part and the bad part. Because the good part is that, it's not a life-threatening condition. It doesn't debilitate you unless your new date says, was it snowing outside? In which case you might with embarrassment. But because of that, there hasn't been the kind of scientific power brought to the subject to really try to analyze it. And only recently have some of the organisms that are involved been looked at more closely, and some of the causes. So that's the good and bad of it being a benign condition. But there are things cropping up in the literature. There were discoveries made that have led to a partial understanding of the condition, but the official understanding is still quite incomplete. And I've taken it a step further in my understanding based on my work 40 years ago at the NIH. And I'd like to share my hypothesis because I found that it works in people.
Well, I know I would love to hear that. And I'm sure anybody listening who has been struggling with this for a really long time would love to hear it, because the answers that you get when you go to the dermatologist and ask for help are like, you're just going to have to manage it. Sorry.
Even, even before my training, and probably more than 50 years ago, it was noticed that there was a particular organism that lived in the skin. It was a type of yeast. It used to be called pityrosporum, and now it's called malassezia. But in the early days, it was called pityrosporum, and there seemed to be some kind of relationship of pityrosporum to the dandruff. So that's where certain chemists, pharmacochemists, created shampoos with the zinc pyrethrione, the blue shampoos like Head and Shoulders, that had an anti-yeast effect. And what that does is give you a reduction of the yeast, and it appears to give a temporary improvement of the scaling. But you have to keep using it over and over, because it doesn't really kill it. And that's great for the shampoo manufacturer.
That is true.
And it's also as far as they could do with that. It's not the... I don't think it was just on purpose that they did it that way. So the question is, if you look at the literature, you see some articles that show that there's an increase in the pityrosporum or malassezia at the sites of inflammation, but some don't. Some don't. So it's not completely clear from the literature that the pityrosporum is just the cause, but it seems to be involved there somehow. So what could that be? Why would it be? Well, this is where my work at the NIH came in really handy to inform me of what the likely cause was. And so what's happening is there's an inflammatory attack on the pityrosporum, and then that is causing a sequence of events. So the inflammatory attack is that the immune system sees that yeast and says, oh, we don't like it. And they start attacking. And then there's a cascade of events that occurs from that attack. So I asked the question, why is there a stronger attack in some people than others? Right? So the answer that I get is that something else must have stimulated the immune system to attack that yeast more vigorously in that given individual at that time. Well, what could stimulate it? Could be another yeast that looks somewhat like it morphologically or immunologically, biochemically. So what kind of yeast? Well, we have a lot of yeast that can live in the intestinal tract.
I don't want to make any guesses. I'm listening. I am waiting on bated breath to hear this.
It's not from the country up above north of us, but it sounds like it. It's Candida, not Canada. Candida albicans is a frequent inhabitant of our digestive tract. And if you look at the immunology literature, you'll find that although it's phylogenetically very different from Pityrosporum malassezia, I'm using the two terms, depending upon how old an article you read, it is immunologically cross-reactive.
So when you say that, for somebody who they don't have a science background, so what I'm hearing you say, as I'm thinking about simplifying this, would be that your body's little police service sees Candida and says, whoa, we need to address that. We need to stop it in its tracks. And now that it's already recognized this Candida that's in the intestinal tract, it goes looking elsewhere for other things that look similar. And it sees this other type of more of a fungal organism. And it goes, oh, we should attack that.
Exactly. Because it's being smart, trying to control that. So you've done the work for me in terms of making it similar, making the analogy. Another way I would say is, if I meet an attractive woman in a yellow sweater with things in their ears and dark hair at a party, and then I, just for a moment, and then I go looking for her, and I see somebody who's wearing a yellow sweater, who's, has those same characteristics, I might,
confuse them.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I would seek them out. So the immune system sees something similar, sees something that it has a particular opinion about, and it seeks out others like that. So we call that molecular mimicry. We call it cross-reactive recognition. And it's the principle of most autoimmune attacks and a lot of inflammatory attacks.
So I guess I'm asking you a question just because you said that based off of my thoughts. Are you implying that this process could be somewhat autoimmune in nature?
Well, you have your own immune system that is attacking something that looks like a bandit, a culprit, a problem. And so there's a fine line between autoimmune and allergic or inflammatory in a way, sure.
And this fungal organism that lives on the skin, is that technically a part of the normal skin microbiome? Like it normally, like Candida is normally in the gut. It's just that the good gut bacteria help keep the levels in check. It's when things go crazy. So is that part of the normal skin microbiome?
Very much so. So most people have malassezia or Pityrosporum in the skin. Now, so the attack is because there are a variety of things that are going wrong, and I'm grasping on one or two possibilities. There are a host of other enzymes that are involved in its activity for preparing the skin to be a good meal for it. And some of these things may be shifted in their activity. So yes, you're right. It's not the only piece that's involved. And I'm looking at the literature and where everybody's saying, well, we think it's involved, but we can't prove it. Well, the point is that first of all, they don't discuss the cross-reactivity in most of the articles that I've seen. Second of all, since my training, there's been a differentiation of the types of malassezia that live in the skin. And an author named Shanius from Scandinavia has written a lot about malassezia and looked at the different types. And I mentioned a few of the types that are most likely to be associated. And also the names are a problem because different people have different names for them, the different subtypes. But that may be part of the issue. I just also want to say that it's not just the Candida albicans, but other yeast and their byproducts can be aggravators, such as the yeast from bread or beer or fungal products, which are, again, more distant cousins. And in our culture, we have been growing more and more Candida in our guts because the sugar consumption has gone up. I think from the 1990s, it was 90 pounds of sugar per year per person in this country. It's up to 151, or it was the last time I looked. It may be higher.
It is quite significant. And I know too, people listening to this get nervous. I think, oh my gosh, I've got to go sugar-free. I got to cut out all the sugar out of my diet, and I've got to do all these crazy things. But I think the first thing that's important, at least from my understanding, is to say, okay, do we have this yeast issue going on in the gut? I mean, I would love to hear your perspective on this about how to address this, because everybody's thinking about how do I deal with it topically. But if the original trigger is happening from internal, you really have to start internally.
Well, that's the point that I wanted to make. And probably you have to do both parts of the equation, because if you have the stimulus there and the stimulus here, you got to lower both stimuli. And incidentally, I think that this is why there's so much excitement now about keto diets and, and sugar-free diets and ancient diets and all these diets. I mean, we didn't have access to 5-pound bags of sugar for most of our development, right? As a species. So nowadays we have sugar added to so many different foods. So that, 150 pounds of sugar is nearly a half pound of sugar per day. So I'm not worried about
a half. Oh my gosh! Sometimes when you think about it, you don't really know what that translates to, and until somebody makes it very, it's just like what it is in your real life, and you're like, oh, that's a lot of sugar.
Well, look, I looked at some of these little cans of fruit drink. Actually, it was at the Indian store. And I said, gee, I'd like to have that guava drink or whatever it was. And then I looked at 39 grams of sugar. Mm-hmm. So, that's... it's
a lot of sugar.
It's a lot of sugar. That's... So, and that's just one drink. And then you talk about all the sweetened drinks. And then it's hard to buy cereal that isn't sweetened. And it's in so many different products. So we're not talking about that a person can't have a piece of fruit here and there. We're talking about just, making some shifts, and not having sugar in everything they're eating. The sauces, the ketchup, it's all over the place.
It is. So what would you say if a patient comes to you, and so this is a general patient, everybody that's listening, we're not saying these are the exact steps you should take. You should always work with someone to figure out what you need to do. But generally speaking, if a patient presents him or herself and he or she has seborrheic dermatitis on the scalp and the eyebrows, maybe for a man has it around the beard, what are some of the bullet points of what you're going to recommend as far as helping to get this issue under control?
Well, I'm going to recommend a tremendous increase in vegetables, especially steamed vegetables, and an accompanying reduction in sugar and in simple carbohydrates, white flour, that sort of thing, white rice, so that they get a controllable level, so they're not having a lot of glucose, either that they're eating or that is being released from the food that they're eating in a rapid manner. I'm going to put them on some probiotics and some fiber and anti-yeast supplements, and I'm going to see how far that takes it. Now, there are some people where there are also food allergies that contribute to this. There are some people with essential fatty acid deficiencies that have to be corrected. Some people with neurological issues. And of course, one of the issues that brought seborrheic dermatitis more to the forefront was that it can be very prominent in patients with AIDS.
Oh, interesting.
So I haven't fully investigated that because I don't have an AIDS population that I take care of. Clearly, that's people whose immune system is dysregulated in a lot of ways, some of which is underregulated. So it's not a simple issue, but in people who have a relatively normal immune system, it's really helpful to deal with the amount of yeast and fungal products they're having and reduce that dramatically. And so we're lowering the yeast in the gut and maybe doing topical things to lower the yeast in the skin and the scalp.
Any suggestions on something more natural that you could use topically?
Well, there are companies that have been working on that a lot, and they use products that consist of tea tree oil often, which has anti-yeast and antifungal properties, some glycerin, but glycerized licorice-derived products. There's a company that sent me some products that makes a number of these products called Cometis, and they've taken some combinations with the zinc pyrethroid and some products that don't have that at all, that are using some of these herbs and a bunch of other herbs that they've come up with. So anti-yeast herbs can be helpful. In terms of internally, the probiotics can be very useful, and I like the basic ones that are containing both Lactobacillus acidophilus and bifidobacterium.
And can I ask you a question about that? There is a particular type of yeast that can be used therapeutically called Saccharomyces boulardii. Do you know or are you familiar with that, if that could potentially also be cross-reactive?
I think that's a very important question, because some people, I like Saccharomyces boulardii for crowding out all kinds of stuff, like especially traveler's diarrhea. Okay? So that's where it can be very useful, because and maybe in the initial stages it could be useful. But I think that there's a potential problem with it cross-reacting in the later stages of treatment. That if you're going to use it, I don't think you want to keep using that all along. Maybe initially.
That's really interesting.
I didn't search the literature specifically for that, but I suspect that it can be a problem.
Okay.
When you're trying, see, there are two stages of this. One is crowding out the yeast, and the second stage is you've heard of the 4 R's and all that from medicine people.
For me, yes.
Okay. So, remove, replace, all that kind of thing. But there's an R that I don't think Jeff Bland tended to use, and that's the one that I add, is called Reinstruct. Okay? So the last one is to re-instruct your gut immune system to not allow the big level of yeast. So your gut immune system is keeping things under some kind of control. So you want it to keep control, because normally we have some yeast in the intestinal tract. We just don't want 4+ Candida albicans. We don't want the maximum overpopulation. You let your friends have some parking spaces, but you don't want to let the whole neighborhood fill your driveway, right? So this is the same thing with the gut immune system. You want it to try to control a balanced population. So part of controlling that balance is using prebiotics and using soluble fiber to ensure that you have a diverse bacterial population. What is that like? The analogy is you have a strong lawn, a good firm grass lawn. There's not a lot of room for the weeds. Okay? And there'll be a few, but not a lot of room. So the same thing in the intestinal tract. We want a nice, healthy, diverse bacterial population, so there's not a lot of room. So that's one form of keeping control. The other form is that the gut immune system is probably playing some active role in controlling that. And the problem there is that if you've had yeast issues for a long, long time, you get good control of it, but your gut immune system is sort of remembering the way things used to be, and you just have a beer or a sip of beer in the wrong time or whatever, that can re-instruct the gut immune system and say, oh, hey, it's family, I'll let them stay. So that's a place that people who are not familiar with the concept of immune tolerance get hung up and miss the boat on this. And patients get in trouble. Practitioners don't quite know what's going on.
And so I have one last question for you. for people who are listening and going, well, if I go through all of this, should I ideally, I mean, we know that every case is different. And so we're not in any way, shape, or form by talking about this, making a claim that if you do this, you're going to be healed or cured or anything like that. We're providing avenues and research to help people and give them other options. But generally speaking, in your experience addressing the yeast issue, does that seem to make a significant improvement in people's seborrheic dermatitis to the point where either it's not so big of an issue, it completely resolves?
I find that in a lot of people, this is one of the components of making a big shift. There are people who have a lot of other things going on, food allergies, essential fatty acid imbalance, maybe certain kinds of anxiety issues. What's interesting is that in patients who have a denervation, maybe they have a Parkinson's, or they have some kind of reason why they lose nerve function on one side of the head, they can get seborrhea on that side. So the nervous system has something to do with this. And some of the people, I can think of one person in the past with very resistant seborrhea in the beard area. Did everything and he still wouldn't get better, but there was a very significant anxiety overlay. And I often wonder whether that had something to do neurologically with the information going. Remember, we've got a whole host of enzymes that we're using, that the organism is using to try to strip our skin. It has to use this organism doesn't make its own fats. So it has to get the body to make the right fats for it to use, the skin. So it's not just using what's there. It has to kind of put stuff out and informational molecules out to get back what it wants. So these interactions are really multidimensional. And so we have to keep listening to somebody who has a problem, if you're a practitioner, to get some idea what kinds of things might be going on. What's the pathophysiology of that organism in a given individual that you can alter? Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And I always remind people, clients, even listeners, that especially if your case is really chronic and you've got a lot of symptoms, everywhere in the body, you can't just fixate on the skin symptoms. You have to look elsewhere because the body's connected. And the more complicated the issue is, that's why it is important to work with someone who has experience and can turn stones over that you have no idea to even look in that particular spot, because it's usually not one thing that fixes everything.
Exactly. What happens is I see people who've done a lot of the right things. They come to me and they've gotten all kinds of advice from the blogosphere. But the people who are blogging don't put out enough information so that one can interpret the degree to which their case is similar to another person's case.
Exactly.
And these are the kinds of people who I'm able to take to the next level, and who are a practitioner who's really immersed in the various aspects of this, not just the herbalism, but the science, the immunology, the dermatology, can often take the information that's coming in and keep pressing at it to get enough answers to understand what's off in a person's pathophysiology that has to be shifted. I had a patient yesterday who had come from some distance, and when we were dealing with her issues, it was an hour and 5 minutes into the interview that I finally got out of her that she was eating nutritional yeast.
Oh my goodness.
We didn't bring it up when I mentioned yeast. And that preceded the aggravation of her condition. So, sometimes somebody's doing all the right things, but they didn't catch one thing, or they're using kombucha, or they're using, apple cider vinegar, which is loaded with yeast, which might have helped some other person in a different condition, but for them pushes them over. So it's not only what one's doing, but how the relationship between what one is doing and their change in symptoms that has to be examined to understand how their body's working.
Exactly. Well, I just want to thank you so much for joining us again. I love talking to you, and I hope that you will again come back and we can talk on some of these other topics, because you are such a wealth of knowledge. And I love that you have helped clarify this issue for people who've been struggling a long time, who think that their only help is going to be a shampoo. And in reality, this is an invitation to say, hey, I do need to look deeper. And I want to remind everybody, you have a fantastic website over at holisticdermatology.com. Even though maybe you don't have acne, there is a free ebook there you can sign up for. But either way, I would suggest get on Dr. Dattner's email list. That way you can stay in touch with him and learn about the things that he's doing. He's got a fantastic book called Radiant Skin from the Inside Out. And he also, for anybody listening who's a practitioner, he has written a chapter or several chapters in integrative medicine, which is a textbook for practitioners. So you can stalk him a little bit through his literature that he has published about what he is putting out into the world, so that we can really help spread this information and knowledge further and help people start rebuilding healthier skin. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Dattner.
No, you're very welcome. I'm glad to have had the opportunity to share this with you and with your listening population, because I hope that there's enough of a demand for this kind of medicine that more and more people do it, and that the insurance companies finally start covering the time that's necessary for experts in these areas to maintain their expertise and to provide the detailed work that's necessary to get at the cause of people's problems.
Awesome. I hope for all of my dandruff sufferers out there that this is a light bulb turning on in your head and maybe even inspires you to start looking into some of this stuff. If you know someone who's buying lots of Head and Shoulders or any of these other dandruff products, desperately trying to figure out how to address this, share this episode with them. As always, all of the links and everything we discuss will be in the show notes for this episode. And of course, if you have any questions, head on over there and leave a comment. I've actually been really excited to share this episode with you, because to me, this is something that nobody's really talking about. And dandruff is incredibly embarrassing. So let's spread the word and help people break free from feeling like they have to constantly and chronically manage this problem. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, now's the time. Hit subscribe and rate and review the podcast if you haven't done so yet. I wish you a fantastic day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.